Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Manara Podcast. I'm Abir, joined today with two esteemed guests, Zan and Liam. Very welcome to have you guys both. And today's discussion will be kind of, I suppose, mainly a follow on from what we've had not too long ago, just as I suppose, Syrian revolution happened and the fall of the Assad regime happened. We've, of course, had yourself, Liam, for that discussion as well. Um, and yeah, it's really just a continuation to kind of discuss, I suppose, Syria as it stands, and go through, I suppose, where it's kind of left itself now post that revolution, how its prospects are, and so on. One thing I do want to say quickly before we get into that discussion, and we will touch, of course, on, I suppose, Palestine, but mainly on in the context of Syria. But we have actually, as a team, been wanting to do a dedicated podcast for quite some time on Palestine. Unfortunately, for just planning logistical reasons, it's not been possible. But I suppose I'd be remiss not to mention it, just because, of course, the situation is still very much devastating for our brothers and sisters there. The ceasefire agreement, I think most of us knew, isn't really going to be an actual ceasefire, and unfortunately, it has very much been that case. And on top of Israel's continuous genocidal actions on Gaza and even in the West Bank, their aggression there, a lot of Palestinians are also suffering under severe weather conditions, tents being flooded in and having to sleep in soaking wet rain and not being given, um, the provisions and everything that they're entitled to legally. But I just want to touch on that to acknowledge it because, of course, it's still going on. They're still in our duas and our prayers and everything else. And inshallah, we do hope to do a proper, dedicated podcast that really, it deserves its merit as well. It deserves to be one of quality, which is one of the reasons as well why we haven't rushed something out. But I felt it should be mentioned because I know it's something Zan, I've talked about as well. We both felt guilt as well over not being vocal. And doing kind of using this platform to talk about Palestine as recently as we should have. But inshallah, that's coming soon. And for now, uh, I think the best place, Liam, for to jump into this discussion is probably just a quick recap over the Syrian revolution, why it happened, and who's in charge of the region now.
Yeah, of course. So, of course, first off, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. Hopefully I can make a positive contribution. Of course, the Syrian Revolution, most people know the background. It started as really basic protests against some of the more extremities of the Assad regime. The initial protests back in 2011, part of the Arab Spring, did not call for the fall of the Assad regime, but they escalated into calling for the fall of the Assad regime due to the response from the Syrian government. That included torture, that included killing, that pushed the people in Syria to begin protesting and calling for the fall of the Assad regime. From then on, there were army defectors. People defected from the Syrian army due to the fact that the Syrian army was getting orders to, fire upon protesters. Some of these guys disagreed with that and they defected. Eventually spiraled into a big civil war. And of course, most people know the background of the civil war. It was a very brutal civil war, deadly long civil war that, of course, gave birth to the rise of ISIS, that saw Iranian and Russian intervention into Syria, that saw the PKK or the Syrian faction of the PKK break away and try to form their own little statelet in the northeast of Syria. That also saw, of course, a lot of the other rebel factions for a very long time. They were all split up. Some of them were more Islamically inclined. Some of them were more secular in nature. Not like they were like ideologically secular. They were kind of just like guys with guns. It's really a better description of it. Um, Everybody doing their best to fight the Assad regime. The Assad regime, for a long time, of course, throughout the civil war, it seemed as if they had won. The rebels were basically forced into Idlib, and the PKK, the YPG, they controlled their section of Syria, and they had this weird kind of, understanding with Assad. But then, of course, October 7th happened, and Hezbollah got involved in the war to support the Palestinians. Of course, Israel retaliated. Israel did huge damage to Hezbollah, killed Hassan Nasrallah, massively weakened Hezbollah, massively weakened Iran, Russia was bogged down in Ukraine. All of this led to the ideal conditions for the Syrian rebels holed up in Idlib to break out of Idlib, and they went down within about 10 days. They conquered basically all of Assad-held Syria because the Syrian army itself, they didn't want to fight anymore. And without outside intervention from Iran and Russia or from Hezbollah, that was it. It was over. And now, of course, the leader of what was formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, and then Jabhat Fatah Sham, and then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and now, of course, the head of the Syrian government, they used to call him Abu Muhammad al-Julani. Now they just call him his regular name, which is Ahmed Al-Sharaa, and he's now the president of Syria. Of course, he was for a very long time actually really disliked by some of the factions of the Syrian rebels, at least, because they saw him as tyrannical, they saw him as extremist. Nowadays, he's very popular amongst almost all previously rebel supporting people in Syria. And he is popular. He's very popular within Syria. And he's the current president, as well as the people who were with him, particularly in the final iteration of his organization, which was called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, are now basically the government of Syria.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Liam.
So that's it. Quick
That's a really
background.
good summation of the story so far. And my question now is just about the you're saying that he's very popular right now. So how would you square that with the fact that Israelis and perhaps other factions are making noise that the Jews are being mistreated, and similarly some Christians are in the West, people like Candace Owens, right wing commentators are accusing Syria of carrying out a Christian genocide, which does seem to come from a place of just general hostility to the Islamism of Al-Sharaa and his faction. How legitimate are these claims? Are they just hyperbolic?
Yeah, of course. So when it comes to the relationship between the new Syrian government and the minorities, the new Syrian government, or factions within the new Syrian government, people within the new Syrian government and the new Syrian army, there definitely were sectarian massacres. I have to say that straight up. So a little while ago, of course, there was fighting on the coast of Syria, where, of course, the majority of the population on the coast of Syria are Alawi. And of course, anybody who knows anything about the Syrian war knows that there's huge hostility between the Alawi minority and between the majority, the majority of Sunni Syrians, right? The reason being, of course, because the Sunni majority in Syria really disliked Bashar al-Assad, obviously, and they also really disliked, obviously, the crimes that were perpetrated against them. And they associated a lot of the crimes of the
Right.
Syrian government with the Alawi minority, because the Alawi minority was, by and large, of course, loyal to the Syrian government. People know this. And so in, maybe about 5 months ago, I forget the exact time, there was a small, kind of mini uprising amongst some factions on the coast that used to work for Bashar al-Assad's government, used to be in Bashar al-Assad's army, and they ambushed some new Syrian army fighters, killed a few of them, and then in response, the Syrian government's forces basically, combed through towns and villages and cities throughout the coast, trying to deal with these people. In the process, like 100% people were killed. Like 100% people were killed. Likewise, down south in Sueda with the Druze, there was a similar thing wherein you had some Druze factions who were hostile to the government, who were previously in the Syrian army, so on and so forth. Fighting escalated, particularly between the Syrian government and between, some, not all, but some Druze leaders in the south of Syria who had also reached out to the Israelis for support and protection. Of course, that fighting escalated. Everybody knows about, for instance, there was actually fighting between Bedouin tribesmen and between some of
Right.
these Druze militiamen
Yep.
in the south of Syria. And this again escalated into further fighting, bringing in government forces. And again, in Sueda, like we have to call a spade. We have to say what it is. What it is. 100% there were massacres and 100% people were killed. With the Christians haven't been massacred, right? Definitely, you could say that there's a lot of Syrian Christians who feel very scared, who feel like maybe the new Syria doesn't have a place for them. and they're not particularly happy with the current situation. But at the same time, the Syrian government has tried to reach out, at the very least, to um, leaders of the Syrian Christian, the Orthodox Christian community in particular. They've invited them to the Syrian presidential palace. They've tried to open dialogue with their leaders. But, in terms of the average Syrian Christian guy on the ground and what they think, you'll get a variety of perspectives. Definitely, some of them will be very hostile. Some of them will be a lot more like, okay, let's see what we can do, give it a chance. However, the government's relations, definitely with the Alawi minority and with a substantial portion of the Druze minority, are negative at the moment. They're not good. They're not looking good. So
Yeah.
the Syrian government does have to deal with this, but a Christian genocide or anything that's not happening. The government isn't killing Christians. The government isn't even killing Alawi or Druze at the moment. There were massacres, but at the moment, for instance, in the south of Syria, there's a ceasefire. Nobody's dying. Likewise, in the coast, to the best of my knowledge, and I could be wrong, it's not like any of the Alawi are being killed or anything like this. However, when the fighting was going down, 100% there were crimes committed, and
I
100%
see.
people were killed unjustly.
Fair enough.
Yeah, we have
But
to we
I
have
guess
to
to a certain
say what it
extent,
is.
it was a bit of a two-way street.
Yeah, it was a two-way street. Certainly a lot more Druze and Alawi civilians were killed
Right.
than Sunni Muslim
Mm,
civilians were killed in
I
that,
see.
like 100%. At
Yeah.
least from what I know, right? If somebody has some sort of information that contradicts me, I'm totally open to that. But from what I know, from what I've read, from what I've
Uh-huh.
seen, that's what happened. However, there are elements in Sweda and elements in the coast that
Right.
are very hostile to the government. That used to be part of the Assad's army, and
Right.
particularly the guys in the south. Of course, we know Al-Hijri, the leader of this Druze militia, is
Wow.
openly
Okay.
allied now with the Israelis and
Right.
trying to seek Israeli support, and
Right.
the Israelis are
Okay.
happy to give it to him.
Interesting. So,
Yeah, I think you can't.
right.
Sorry, Zan, just to interrupt, but you can't discount that the foreign influence as well with the region, with the regime change, like you mentioned and alluded to, Zan. There's the political commentators, the likes of from the U.S. and elsewhere, that were immediately commenting on the situation, expressing concerns like this about the Druze, the Alawis, as well as especially Christians. Um, and it's no surprise as well that there's foreign influence attempting to be exerted by the likes of Israel as well, who have a vested interest in that region. And that certainly was one of the big criticisms of uh, this new regime and Ahmed Al-Sharaa, that it'll just be a puppet for Israel, for Zionists, and it'll be a negative for Palestine as well. With what you're saying, Liam, do you think there is a possibility of that being, I suppose, true, or with the likes of some of these other, I guess, dissenters, you could say, to attempting to establish those kind of relationships and gather support from Israel? Is that a big concern? Would you say?
Yeah, 100%. Um, Al-Hijri in particular, the head of this Druze militia. Yeah, he has known connections to Israel, right? Like 100% this guy has connections to Israel. 100% there's a lot of Druze now in Sweda who openly call for Israeli intervention. You can see pictures online where you have members of the Druze community in Sweda flying Israeli flags during their protests. So like
Mm,
100% Israel is trying to take advantage of the situation and is trying to use the Druze. Not that Israel
okay.
particularly cares about the Druze, like it cares about the Druze a bit because the Druze within Palestine
Uh-huh.
are loyal to the Israeli government. Um, but there's also a history of the Druze and Lebanon fighting the Israelis when the Israelis invaded, the Jumblat family and so on and so forth, Kemal Jumblat and so on. The Israelis don't care about the Druze per se, but they have a bit of affinity for the Druze, a bit of
Yeah.
genuine affinity for some sections of the Druze community because of the Druze in Palestine. Maybe we might say this. Some people might analyze it differently, but who knows? Um, but 100% again, the Israelis are trying to use it as a way to weaken the Syrian government. The Israelis don't want to see the Syrian government strong. They want to see the Syrian government weak. With regards to the Alawi, from what I've read and from everything I've heard, the Alawi actually have very little support from anyone. They get no support from Iran. Iran doesn't give the Alawi any support. And as far as I'm aware and everything I've read, they also get no support from Hezbollah. Hezbollah and Iran don't give them any support. And that's more or less all I've heard. The Alawi, I saw some Alawi post people on Telegram. People were talking about it. That this Alawi militia commander guy was essentially complaining that nobody supports them. So so in terms of how much they're being used, I don't think they're being particularly used. Maybe they will be in the future. I'm sure a lot of people would try to use them in the future. Whereas the Druze are just being used by
Okay,
Israel.
interesting. And just a question building upon that is, okay, you've given us a very good update on where the minorities are in Syria today in terms of the Jews and the Alawis and the Christians. And so I guess a follow-up question is more on the on the level of foreign relations for Syria. Where are the foreign powers in relation to Syria today? And by that I particularly mean the axis of resistance, as they call themselves. Where's Hezbollah and Iran today, and where is Russia today, and how do they all feel about the modern Syrian state? And just focusing on, I think let's focus in on those three for now, because I think the next question I want to ask is about the trajectory and the future of Syria, and that obviously has a lot more to do with America and Israel. So let's just leave them to the side for now. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, sure. So, of course, Russia, everybody knows now the Syrian government is developing relations with Russia. Obviously, everybody knows that they sent a delegation off to literally meet Putin. Even now, I was just reading that the Russians have also sent a military delegation to Damascus now for establishing further coordination between the two of them. The Russians have been quite eager and quite happy to engage the Syrian government. The Russians don't particularly care about who the new government is. Sure, of course, they might not like it, but in the end, the Russians have shown that they're more than willing to engage the Syrian government in order to secure their interests. Right. From what I've read about what that means in terms of securing their interests, of course, whether it's the presence of their military bases, whether it's trying to make sure that the Americans basically don't get everything, and the new Syrian government finds itself completely reliant upon the Americans, and the Russians have no sway at all. The Russians are quite eager and quite happy to engage the Syrians. So that's the stance of the Russians. The Russians have basically let bygones be bygones, the Syrian government as well, and they've gone ahead and they've tried to establish relations. Hezbollah and Iran are different. Iran, in particular, has been very stubborn and is not engaging the Syrian government. There were rumors a little while ago that were going around from some journalists on social media and so on and so forth, that actually there are some people within the Syrian government who would be quite happy to engage the Iranian government. There was also a clip a little while ago going around of Ahmed Al-Sharaa basically saying that if Iran wants to engage them, he's open. And again, in terms of the factions of the Syrian government that are happy to engage the Iranians, they see it as a necessity to counter Israel, because of course Iran is the only power in the region who will supply them with weapons to fight the Israelis, particularly the Israelis. Well, we can go into that later. They want the Iranian support basically as a counterbalance against the United States, and they think that they need that support because in a confrontation with Israel, a serious confrontation with Israel, they're the only ones who can back them. But apparently, the Iran government just is not interested. And for the reasons why, some people say this is just because Iranian foreign policy is actually usually very slow to adjust to changes. The Iranians don't adjust to changes well. A lot of people say that the Iranians and the Syrians, quite frankly, have a lot more bad blood between one another than the Syrians and the Russians do. And you can get into all the discussions as to why that is. Some pro-Syrian government people on Twitter or social media, wherever it is, will say that the reason being is because their war against the Iranians, or the Iranian war against them rather, was sectarian in nature, a lot more hate-filled, whereas the Russians were just securing their interests. Despite the fact that the Russians almost certainly killed much more Syrians than the Iranians did, they would say that their war against Iran was more personal, I guess you could say. Whereas with the Russians, it's more detached, just business. You know, the Russians didn't care who they were fighting. They had their interests. They don't care if you have a beard, you don't have a beard. They don't care. They have their interests. Get out of the way if you run into them. Of course, again, the Russians killed tons and tons and tons of people in Syria. Again, much more likely they killed far more people than the Iranians did. Uh, but that's a separate conversation. So actually, in terms of the engagement from the Iranians, from what I've heard, it's
Mhm.
mainly the Iranians who are the biggest reason why there's been very little engagement. Um, it very well could be that that engagement will come in the future when the Iranians decide to change their mind, or if the Syrians find themselves desperate in the face of continued Israeli hostility and they
Mhm.
have no choice. But we'll see what happens. With Hezbollah, um, more or less the same thing. There's been, as far as people can tell, like, very little engagement. Hezbollah has sent, a few diplomatic messages apparently to the Syrians, basically being like, hey, look, we want no beef. Uh, the Syrian president has said that he also has no reason to, for instance, continue hostility against Lebanon or continue hostility against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still managing to smuggle weapons through Syria into Lebanon. There are some people who are saying that the reason that Hezbollah is still able to smuggle weapons is because the Syrians are allowing it to happen, because they know that Hezbollah is a good counterweight to the Israelis. And it's basically the Syrians telling the Israelis and indirectly telling the Americans, like, hey, if we want to, we can let a lot more weapons go through. But of course, at the same time, the Syrian government continues to intercept Hezbollah weapons shipments at the same time, and posts this on social media and so on and so forth to be like, "Oh, look, we're
Mhm.
stopping Hezbollah weapon shipments." But there's been no real engagement between the two of them, and who knows whether there will be some sort of actual serious
Mhm.
engagement between the two of them in the future. I tend to doubt it, especially in the current climate when Tom Barak, of course, the American ambassador to Turkey, and also the one who's handling the Syrian file, the American, diplomat who's handling the Syrian file, and for a long time handled the Lebanese file. He's now stepped down from that. Um, as long as he wants to keep the pressure up on Hezbollah to disarm, I don't see the Syrians, ruining that and getting on the Americans' bad side. I don't think the Syrians will do anything, to be honest.
Yeah, especially as well. I think it's fair to say that uh, Ahmed Al-Sharaa has been quite friendly with the current presidency, Trump, the current regime in America as well. So it does make sense that he wouldn't really want to disrupt that, especially with the likes of Iran and Hezbollah. There's already so much bad blood. I think it's reasonable to be skeptical of things changing. Maybe just this kind of mutual agreement not to kill each other is probably the best that can be achieved for at least a long time.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't think they're gonna engage each other in, like, for a while. I think it could happen in the future. I think it could happen in the future. I think a lot of it would be determined how Israel decides to deal with the Syrians. And if the Syrians find themselves in a really desperate situation. But again, like, the the dislike of a lot of Syrians for Hezbollah and Iran is much deeper and much more personal than their dislike for Russia. That, a lot of them were able to, at least from what I've seen, were very quick to basically get over their beef with Russia. Whereas I don't think the same thing would happen with Hezbollah and Iran. A lot of them would, that's very personal for them, um, and I don't see it happening for a while.
Fair enough.
How much of a risk would you say Iran and Hezbollah is um, for the current government in Syria? I mean, I imagine at the minute, maybe not a huge risk because both Iran and Hezbollah have been like, severely weakened with their actions and Israel's actions on them over the last kind of 2 years. Um, but do you think in the near future it could become a bigger source of concern?
I don't think so. There are definitely people who would disagree with me. I don't see how. Um, Hezbollah is facing the possibility of another big Israeli assault against them, externally. And then internally, they're facing the Lebanese government, which keeps saying they want to disarm them. and the political pressure being put on the Lebanese government from the United States and indirectly from Israel to disarm Hezbollah via the Lebanese army. I don't think Hezbollah isn't going to try to enter into a conflict with the Syrians. Um, I also don't think they have the capacity to even harm one another. I don't think Hezbollah has the capacity to what? What are they going to do? They're going to fire rockets at Damascus? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are they going to do? Likewise, what are the Syrians going to do? Are they going to invade the Bekaa? Like, what is this? You know what I mean? I'm sure there's a lot of people who would say the Syrians might have the capability to do so, but what? This is not happening. A Syrian invasion of Lebanon would be political suicide for them. That would be ridiculous. So I don't think Hezbollah is a threat to them at all. Again, a lot of them might think otherwise, but I don't think it's any serious threat. Certainly not existential. And Iran is the same thing. You know, Iran certainly, and there's evidence that Iran tried to support various rebellious elements in Syria, trying to whip up opposition to the government. It's largely unsuccessful, and I suspect it to continue to be largely unsuccessful because Iran has no more base of support within Syria. And I don't think they can really do anything to the new government. But they are still hostile, and I'm sure the Syrians definitely do still really dislike them. But I don't think they pose any real threat to the government.
So I guess that brings us very nicely and neatly to what is the future for Syria, and how does that relate to three parties that we haven't mentioned in depth yet? How does the future of Syria relate to how will that happen in tandem with the relations with America, Israel, and Turkey, who all seem to be probably the top three most influential parties in determining the economic and political development of and economic political outlook of the new Syrian state.
Yeah, 100%. So, like, you know, the current Syrian government, their number one priority at all costs is to lift the sanctions on Syria and develop Syria economically, right? That's why we're seeing Ahmed Al-Sharaa go to New York. That's why we're seeing Ahmed Al-Sharaa, try so hard to get the Americans on side. The Syrians have really done this enormous diplomatic outreach, to the West, especially to the United States, to try to get the sanctions lifted, to try to basically propose to the United States that they would be a reliable ally. Even further than a partner. There are people in the Syrian government who, when they describe their future relationship with the United States, they literally say, "We will be a good ally to you," especially in the most recent visit of the Syrian government to the United States. So the Syrians see the United States as a really important, really crucially important player in the future of Syria. And they want to be friends with the United States. They want to ally themselves to the United States. And, who knows what the deals that are being held, of course, behind closed doors. But it's very obvious that the Syrians want to tie themselves to the United States. And the reason being, of course, is the United States has enormous power over the fate of Syria. There are still sanctions on Syria, even most recently when the Syrian government with their delegation went to the White House with Trump and everything. The most extreme sanctions that are on Syria are from this thing called the Caesar Act. And the Caesar Act was an act previously put on Bashar al-Assad's government, but they've remained, and they haven't actually been lifted because they have to be lifted through Congress. Trump has signed executive orders suspending the Caesar Act for 6 months. He did so previously, and he's done so again in the most recent visit of the Syrian government to the United States. However, these suspensions, they're not the same as getting sanctions lifted because they don't, first off, they don't give enough, a sense of stability to investors so that they can begin to invest within Syria. Because this is a temporary waiver for 6 months. The sanctions still are technically there, and they haven't been lifted, and who knows what's going to happen in 6 months from now. So for a lot of investors that the Syrian government is trying really hard to attract to Syria, they're saying, okay, this isn't a secure investment for me. And so the Syrian government, henceforth, really needs those sanctions lifted, like properly lifted, which is also why, there was that viral picture of Ahmed Al-Sharaa who met Brian Mast. Brian Mast, of course, was the congressman who's, got his legs blown off, and he's super, super, super pro-Israel. Really
Right.
neocon, right-wing America kind of guy. And Ahmed Al-Sharaa met with him to try to convince him. It's like, hey, look, we're not a threat to the United States. We're not a threat to Israel. Please give the new Syria a chance to rebuild. And of course, again, part of this Syrian diplomatic push is that the new Syria will be an ally to the United States. So by not allowing the Syrian government and the Syrian economy to grow, you're actually harming the interests of the United States in the region. Right? This is the indirect undertones that's being said. Because the new Syrian government is trying to present themselves as like, hey, we are going to help the interests of the United States, and in return, the United States is going to help us grow our country by lifting the sanctions, by bringing in investment, blah blah blah, investment from the Gulf, investment from Turkey, so on and so forth. Brian Mast said no, basically. The sanctions are still there, and the Caesar Act is still there, and they haven't been 100% successful in actually lifting the sanctions, even if they've got the waiver. So that's where the Syrian government's at. The Syrian government, of course, is also trying to diversify their other diplomatic contacts. Of course, reaching out to the Russians. At the moment, the foreign minister Ahmed Al-Sharaa is in China. He's literally there right now. Their deal, from what I've just heard, is that the Syrian government recognizes that Taiwan is a part of China. And in return, the Chinese recognize that the Golan Heights is a part of Syria.
Wow.
So this is what they've accomplished for themselves. Yeah, cool, great guys, that's great. For what it's worth, in the UN, the UN Security Council, when they voted to lift sanctions on Syria, UN sanctions on Syria, every country voted. Yes, all 14 of the 15 members. China was the only one who abstained. China abstained. They didn't even say no, but they abstained. It was potentially a way of the new Chinese government showing suspicion towards the new Syrian government. But anyways, the new Syrian government is trying really, really hard to ally themselves to the United States, to show the United States like we are a reliable partner. We are a reliable partner of the United States of America in this region. And if you help us grow, we will be a reliable partner of the United States in this region. And of course, with Turkey obviously really wants the Syrian government to be successful. A huge, portion of the Syrian rebels' victory can be put on the Turks. Not to say that the Turks, conquered Syria. Like in the end, it was the rebels themselves who conquered Syria. But the Turks are certainly very happy with this, and obviously a huge partner to the Syrian government, and trying really hard to make sure that the Syrian government is successful. Of course, we know the Turks are. Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, Liam. I was just going to say it makes a lot of sense as well because a big similar, I suppose, to everywhere now, where with immigration being such an issue and illegal immigration, but refugees from Syria going to Turkey has been a political issue in the region in more recent years as well. Just with the general economic strain that Turkey's been under, so even just purely from that aspect, that could it's been potentially a positive if there's stability in Syria. You've less likely people needing to flee and potentially people returning back to the country. But yeah, I don't think it was any secret that Turkey was certainly in favor of this current government over the Assad regime.
Yeah, of course, 100%. And it's not just the refugees. Syria is incredibly important strategically for Turkey.
Yeah.
This is a huge win for the Turks that the Syrian government, the current Syrian government, is in control. And the Turks want to make sure it's a successful project, right? They really, really do. When it comes to the Israelis are suspicious of the new Syrian government. The Israelis are probably the biggest opponent, quite frankly, of the new Syrian government. And literally a few hours ago, Israeli media has reported that the talks between the Syrian government and between the Israelis have stalled. Of course, we know that after Bashar al-Assad fell, Israel launched a huge attack on Syrian military installations and took control of a decent portion of Syria including, of course, the very important
Hmm.
Mount Hermon. And the Israelis basically are refusing to withdraw.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Syrians suspected that the Americans would put decent enough pressure on the Israelis to withdraw because the Syrians have now become buddy-buddy with the United States. Whether the Americans did or not, who knows? But at the moment, from what Israeli media is now reporting, literally from today, from a few hours ago, it seems to have failed. If the Americans did put pressure on the Israelis, that is, the Israelis were like,
Right.
no. Um, that being the Americans putting pressure on the Israelis to withdraw from the areas they took
I see.
over after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Um, and really, to be honest, from the Israeli perspective, it's like, why? Why would they do so? We know the Syrians aren't going to do anything to
Of
us. What are
course,
you going to
yeah,
do?
and
Or
it's
do
very
something? You know what
problematic,
I
I
mean?
guess, for the entire region,
Um,
because if they have Mount Hermon, then they basically have their knife at the neck of Syria and Lebanon. They can, from Mount Hermon, they can bomb
yeah,
Damascus and like half of southern Syria and most of Lebanon. They can bomb from that. It's such a strategic um, point from a military perspective. So it's very problematic
yep,
for all of
yep,
Israel's neighbors that they have it. So it's and like you
hugely,
said, what possible incentive could they have to give it up? You know, when they can use it
yeah,
to harass their neighbors, and there's nothing an Israeli likes doing more than harass their neighbors. So that's just very sad and
yeah,
unfortunate. And I guess the point I would say is I guess there's a bit of a distinction to be made about the American and the Israeli perspective. You know, I guess Trump and some Americans are glad that, oh, okay, Iran and Russia have exited Syria, and we've got like a quick win, you know, without us having had done anything. With the Syrian civil war is over, and our friend Erdogan will handle all of that for us. So from I guess from that
yeah,
perspective,
exactly.
it's sorry, my laptop's hello. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, we can hear
Oh,
you. Your
perfect. Sorry.
video's
Yeah, let
going
me
off
just turn that
there.
back on. Yeah, sorry. So I was just saying that from the Syrian perspective, sorry, from the American perspective, this is a nice win, a nice easy, sorry, I'm just adjusting my video. It's not turning on. Apologies, but
Yeah, it keeps
that's okay.
flicking
Yeah, so
off there.
I was just saying that there's a distinction in between the American and Israeli perspective here. America believes that, oh, we've gotten rid of Assad, who was a Russian and Iranian ally, and we've replaced them with a new guy who our friend Erdogan will manage on behalf of us. But I guess from the Israeli perspective, they actually are, I would say, quite aware of how Muslims in the region think and how someone with Ahmed Al-Shara's background thinks deep down about Israel. He's not like a Gulf leader who deep down doesn't really care whether or not Israel exists. A lot of leaders deep down probably think to themselves, Israel is a useful mechanism through which I can work with America and achieve American military and economic support. So deep down, they don't necessarily have a problem with Israel. Whereas deep down, someone like Ahmed Shara probably thinks to himself, "Oh, I would love to destroy Israel,"
Mm.
and that that's the distinction between the American and Israeli perspective. Israel knows that a bit better, and so they're gonna remain suspicious of Syria and try to create as many hurdles as possible for them.
Yeah, 100%. The Israelis also, the way that the Israelis see the Arab world, they see their relations with the Arab world as like a zero-sum game. Um, it's uh, it's kind of like I
Mhm.
win and you lose, especially with Arab countries that aren't under the control of the United States, because Syria isn't under the control of the United States. It's not. Or countries that could potentially form some sort of threat to it in the future. So Syria is like the Israelis are well aware that the Syrians are begging for the Israelis to back off. The Israelis are well aware that if they do back off, the Syrians probably won't actually do anything to them. It's not like the Syrians are going to attack them. And the Israelis are well aware that the Syrians are begging the United States to help them, and that the Syrians are practically throwing themselves at the United States for the United States to help them. The Israelis just don't care because they're like, you're a bunch of Arabs, you're a bunch of Muslims. Um, I don't particularly trust you. Imagine
Hmm.
I'm an Israeli saying this. It's like, I don't particularly trust you. If I allow your country to develop, who knows who's going to rule it in 10 years from now, and then you could potentially pose a threat to me. So what are you going to do? I don't trust you. I don't have any reason to withdraw. I don't have any reason to be soft on you. The only way that I would withdraw is if there's a comprehensive peace agreement. If you come to us and you say that you want to establish peace, in the same way that Egypt or the UAE did, then okay, we can talk to you, because then you've thrown the towel in completely. But the new Syrian government is unwilling to throw the towel in. What the new Syrian government is offering the Israelis is a withdrawal to 1974 lines. That basically means the Israelis withdraw to the Golan Heights, and then the Syrians won't attack them. And then the Syrians are able, with the help of the United States, with the help of the Gulf, with the help of Turkey, to develop their economy. But the Israelis are like, no, 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 screw you. You're a bunch of Arabs, you're a bunch of Muslims, you're on your border, we're well aware of what your population thinks of us. I don't want you to develop. I'd rather you live in squalor. Um, and the new Syrian government's in a really tricky spot of trying to deal with that, because Israel gets a really big vote in what the
Yeah,
future of Syria
unfortunately.
is. And yeah, they do, unfortunately. But they have a really big vote in what the future of Syria is. And you're not dealing with a power that you can actually really negotiate with. The negotiation is, how are you going to surrender? Um, how are you going to throw in the towel? That's all there is to really negotiate. And if you're willing to do that, okay, cool. If you're not willing to do that, then no. You can continue to lose. So it's really, really difficult. And of course, this is also what spurred the Syrians, or one of the things that spurred the Syrians, to very quickly approach the United States and try to offer themselves to the United States as a potential ally and friend. Um, but again, in the hope that the United States will basically call the Israelis off. But obviously, that seems not to have happened.
Hmm.
Not yet, at least. It might happen in the future, who knows? But up until now, it hasn't happened. And actually, even within Congress, in the American media, the most pro-Israel pundits, the most pro-Israel congressmen are the biggest obstacles to any pro-Syrian government policies. So it's a tight spot, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the Syrian government can do about it, especially in the current trajectory that they've gone down, which is trying really hard to curry the favor of the United States in the hope that the United States will call the Israelis off. Ultimately, it depends how much influence the United States has over Israel, and how much influence and how much pressure the United States is willing to put on Israel for the sake of Syria. Um, Even if not for the sake of Syria, but for the sake of Turkey and the Gulf Arab countries that really want Syria to do well, because they also really want the new Syria to do well,
Hmm.
especially Saudi.
Of course.
The UAE is a different thing, but Saudi and Turkey
I
really
guess, yeah,
want the
and so
new
I
Syria to
guess
do
they
well.
probably shared similar perspective to America. Turkey and Saudi just happy that Iranian and Russian influence is gone. Um,
Yep.
and so I,
Yeah,
I guess
100%.
so we've got an understanding of what Syria is doing today. I think it's fair to say, based on what you've said, that Syria is trying to integrate itself into the American-led order for the Middle East, with Turkish encouragement and Israeli aggression
Yep.
simultaneously. And I guess a
Yep.
useful question to follow this up would be: is that what's the perspective? What do you think the general Muslim perspective is? Uh, around the world, and what do you think specifically the Palestinian perspective is on these developments in Syria?
With general Muslim, I don't. I think most Muslim states or Muslim countries or Muslim masses of people don't actually think about
Fair
Syria all
enough.
that much. Um,
Yeah.
quite frankly, just don't like to think about it. Um, I think certainly people in the region want to see
Mhm.
Syria do well. There is still a fair degree of hope that the new Syria will do well. Um, the you know I think minorities within Syria, as well as to a lesser extent minorities throughout the rest of the Arab world, are significantly more hostile to the Syrian government and suspicious of the Syrian government than the Sunni majorities in the region. Um, A lot of minorities are suspicious of the new Syrian government's attitude towards minorities in the country, and we'll see how the Syrian government manages that. Because up until now, they've had successes, but they've also had really, really bad failures, like really bad failures. Um, and I actually think that that lack of solid internal cohesion within the country is also one of the
Mhm.
biggest threats to the new Syrian government. Um, you know, the if you have a significant portion of your population that really dislikes you and doesn't see a future in your country, the Christians have enough money, they'll leave, and the Druze and the Alawi
Right.
will fight you, right? Um, and the new Syrian government
Yeah.
doesn't want that. So they have to manage the minority file, I think, a lot better than they
Hmm.
have up until this point. There's obviously a lot of effort to try to manage it, but they haven't been entirely successful. And again, because, for instance, like in Thwaida, there were massacres in the coast. There were
Hmm.
massacres, like people died, 100%. And the new Syrian government, Ahmed Al-Sharaa is always talking about how he wants to represent. Oh, he has to think in the logic of a state. He's not a revolutionary anymore. He's talking
Hmm.
about the state. Blah blah blah. Well, he has to show a level of statesmanship in how he deals with the minorities in Syria who have also lived there for 2,000 years in the same way that the Muslims have lived there for 1,400 years. And so he has to deal with that. Um, in terms of the wider Muslim world, I think there is still a degree of hope. People want to see the new Syria hopeful, and the majority of press coverage and so on and so forth of the new Syria is still hopeful. You're beginning to see a lot more skepticism, particularly because of the Syrian government's outreach to the United States. Like even recently, I saw somebody, a Taliban member on Twitter, um, sending a tweet in the direction of the Syrian government, basically cautioning them from getting too close to the United States, with an undertone of like, "What are you guys doing?" Do you know what I mean? Um, amongst amongst Palestinians, I would still say actually that the majority of like the average Palestinian guy, um, there's still a fair degree of uh,
Right.
sympathy with the Syrian government and with Ahmed Al-Sharaa. But there definitely is a much higher and rising
Hmm.
degree of skepticism. Again, especially because of Ahmed Al-Sharaa's outreach to the
Yeah.
United States. And a lot of it is born out of, I think, more than anything, out of disappointment. The reason being is because a lot of Palestinians, they kind of hoped that the new Syrian government would put itself on a trajectory of one that would support the Palestinian cause. Now, to be clear, the Syrian government has never offered the Israelis any comprehensive normalization the way the Egyptians or the Jordanians or the Emiratis have. That's not on the table, and the Syrian government hasn't put it on the table. The Syrian government hasn't expressed the desire for full normalization. Um, However, the Syrian government, again, as we were just saying, is trying really, really hard to integrate themselves into the American order because they see the American order as the key to the prosperity of their country and the development of their country, which I understand. The country's war torn. The country is already making big strides in development. For instance, Damascus now has nearly 24-hour electricity, which is really good. Even a
Hmm.
few months ago that didn't exist. They now
I
have
remember
nearly
like
24-hour
I
electricity.
remember 6 months
So the new
ago, I
Syrian government,
think maybe in the middle of the summer, I think her name is Diane Dark. She's a British historian, and she visited, and I remember at the time she said it was
yeah,
something like 8 or 10 hours a day of electricity. Yeah.
yeah. No, they've made huge, huge strides.
Yeah.
If we remember, Idlib was probably the most
Hmm.
well-governed part of Syria when it was controlled by the rebels relative to the Assad-held territories. So there's obviously a lot of people in the new Syrian government who are putting their heart and soul and their technical know-how into developing the country and developing the country's infrastructure. And they're obviously doing a very good job. And they obviously, like, I think, were sanctions lifted and were they getting Gulf and Turkish investment, I think they could build their country up. And I totally understand that desire to build their country up. But where a lot of the skepticism comes from is that their pathway to building their country up is through the American route, is literally through the White House. And again, they see they have no alternative, but regardless, before we get to that, I'm going to explain this. They've gone to the White House. They're getting sanctions lifted, and then they're going to get investment from the United States, from the Europeans, from the Gulf, and from the Turks, all American allies. And so let's say they build up their country, and even they build up their military, and they develop their infrastructure, and they improve the quality of life of the people in their country, which is lovely. Nobody would want the opposite of that, unless you're an Israeli. And they build their country up. Okay, and then what? What's their relationship vis-a-vis the Palestinian cause? So what are you telling me? They're going to integrate themselves into the American order. They're going to offer themselves as an ally to the United States. They're going to get tons of investment from all the American allies in the world. And then what? They're going to do a 180. Oh, we tricked you, boys. We're actually going to go to war. We're going to fight Israel now, boys.
That
We
was the
tricked you
plan
all.
all
Ha
along.
ha ha. That's the plan, boys. We got you.
That was long
Woo!
game.
I had my finger. They had their fingers crossed behind their back. You know?
Prize war.
It's not
Yeah.
happening, right? It's not happening. And I think a lot of people who are really, really pro Ahmed Al-Sharaa, really pro Jolani, they're just
Yeah.
they're not seeing it.
I
I think,
No, I was
and
just going to
again,
say that
sorry, go on.
I do think that that opinion probably still has a lot of currency in some circles. So probably, but people do think that the the long-term strategy of building yourself up economically and focusing on development while avoiding aggression with your
Not
neighbors
happening.
is a good way for Syria to build itself up
Yeah.
and then to be more assertive with its foreign policy objectives, which people
Yeah.
will assume would hopefully be in line with something that would benefit the Palestinians and I guess the wider Middle East. But yeah, I guess one thing I'll
Yeah.
also say on that, one thing I'll say for that, and one thing I can say against that. For that view is that just that the Syria has suffered immensely and that millions of people became refugees and hundreds of thousands of people are killed and tens of thousands of people were tortured and imprisoned. And so I think to a certain degree we do have to have a lot of latitude for the Syrian government insofar as they just need to recover and end the suffering and heal. So I think that's something that's important to mention, and I'm sure you share that perspective. But I guess the more critical element is, and not against the Syrian government so much as it is against the people who are assuming that economic development is the path to an assertive foreign policy. The thing I'd say against that is that it's just not logically consistent. You don't choose material prosperity and for that material prosperity to translate into a moral outlook. If you either choose materialism or morality, and maybe you can choose both. But if you're choosing materialism, it doesn't result in morality. That's the thing I'm trying to say. And so if they're choosing economic development now, why would that change in the future? In 20 years from now, if you get developed, you just choose more development. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like, again, what are they going to do? Imagine, the Syrian government, they put online ideas of what the development of Damascus looks like, and it's just, with all due respect to them, like freaking
Yeah.
stupid glass skyscrapers in Damascus and stuff like this, right? So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to
Yeah.
throw it all away to help the Palestinians? Because like we have to be very clear about what helping the Palestinians means in
Yeah.
any substantial way. Right, you can quote unquote help the Palestinians like Erdogan does by continuing to sell gas to Israel and billions of dollars of worth of gas to Israel and keeping the gas flowing from Azerbaijan. Great job there, Erdo. Or you can help the Palestinians like the Houthis do, right? If you want to help the Palestinians like the Houthis do, you invite hostility from the United States and from Israel, and quite frankly, from you getting bombed. If you want to quote unquote help the Palestinians like Erdogan does, well, you're not actually helping the Palestinians at all. Now, you might not be full Zionist. Like Erdogan's not a Zionist. You know what I mean? He's part of the American order. He's a very important part of American strategy and the American order of the Middle East. Turkey remains a very important part of the American order of the Middle East. Turkey remains a very close and trusted NATO ally of the United States of America. But Erdogan's not going to do anything. Erdogan's not going to send one bullet to anybody fighting the Israelis. And so if Syria continues to go down this path of trying to develop their country by integrating themselves with the American order, naturally 15, 20 years time they're gonna make that choice again. Even now, the only reason anybody's talking about any form of hostility between the Syrians and between the Israelis is because the Israelis have brought the hostility to them. Uh, likewise, it's the same with Turkey, by the way. The only reason anybody's talking about any sort of serious hostility between Turkey and Israel is because the Israelis are the ones who are bringing the hostility to them. Because the Israelis are in like rabid dog, zero sum mode. Anybody who's not like, basically America's little poodle in the region, like Israel's out to get
Right.
you. So, with regards to the new Syrian government doesn't want confrontation with the Israelis, and the new Syrian government won't enter into confrontation with the Israelis. And again, I'm also not saying they should. A lot of people will say, "Oh, what do you want them to do? To go to war with Israel right now?" No, absolutely not. I totally agree. That's complete suicide. You'll just die for no reason. Why would you do that? Don't do that. What I'm sounding the alarm on, and what I think a lot of other people, whether it's online or whether it's people I know in real life, what a lot of Palestinians are very concerned about, more than concerned, again, really truthfully disappointed, is that like Syria will abandon the Palestinian cause. Any substantial effort to help the Palestinian cause, it looks very likely that. And they just won't be there. They just
No, I think
won't
I
help
think
out
that.
really.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would argue. Sorry, I was just say as well. Like I do appreciate that, especially with Trump, just him being an egomaniac. Is often if you can appeal to his ego, he will just make your life easier. Like he's used those executive orders, right, to at least temporarily make things easier for Ahmed Al-Sharaa and Syria. But in terms of long term, I can't imagine, because majority of the American politicians in power are still very much APAC funded. Certainly, like Congress is still very much APAC funded. So I would have found it very hard to believe that they could have got those sanctions fully lifted. I mean, even just looking at Afghanistan, I know Afghanistan is a different situation, and they don't have even really the potential, probably just for geographical reasons more than anything, to really challenge Israel. But they got no ease as well. And not that they tried to, I suppose, appeal to the US. Of course, they're not. They never attempted to as well. Um, and they're still struggling because of those sanctions. But even with Syria being, I suppose, quote unquote, friendlier and more willing to engage with the US, I would have really been surprised if those sanctions would have been lifted. And things could always change, I suppose. But again, so you have to remember as well Ahmed Shah's history as well. Ultimately, he was once very much a direct enemy of the US and on their hit list. So I doubt that's forgotten. Do you know what I mean? As well. But so it definitely felt like a little bit of a flawed strategy from an outsider's perspective as well. It's like, you look at the people you're trying to appeal to. There's only so much you can kind of use flowery language and be I suppose, statesman, and how far that can actually get you. Ultimately, you're dealing with a very, very difficult crowd that don't really probably want anything to do with you in the first place. And so I suppose with that being said as well, do you think, is there a concern that with how hard the Syrian government have attempted to ally themselves with the US, could that really substantially backfire? Like within even just the Muslims as well, within Syria, many of whom maybe would be very, very supportive of this new government, and understandably so, like Zan said, finally have some at least hope that they can actually live in a country that isn't going to just continue to be war torn and ruled by genocidal leader. But do you think that for them, is it maybe already a trust kind of that's been broken, or do you think there still is that enough leeway and hope in Ahmed Al-Sharaa?
Oh no, Ahmed Sharaa is still very, very popular amongst Syrians, right?
Mm.
He's still super popular amongst Syrians. The average Syrian Sunni Arab guy loves him. He's still very, very popular amongst them, and of course, he's the one who freed their country from Bashar al-Assad, right? He has an enormous amount of goodwill, and even if you look at a lot of the revolutionary journalists who were popular throughout the Syrian civil war, They're all very, very, very pro-government. All making these videos showcasing Jolani going to the White House, and with nice music in the background, with pictures of him playing basketball with CENTCOM and so on and so forth. They're all very happy of it. They're all very proud of it. They're all boosting it up. Um, they're not thinking of it in the way that, for instance, a lot of the Palestinians now criticizing the direction of the Syrian government are. And again, also, like, when I say Palestinians, it's not like Palestinians are a monolith on this. There's a lot of Palestinians who are very pro-Syrian government. There's a lot of Palestinians who are also sounding the alarm.
Mhm.
Depends on who you talk to. But no, amongst the Syrians themselves, he's still very, very popular.
Yeah.
And he'll probably remain very, very popular for a while. You know what I mean? I don't see him getting unpopular anytime soon, especially in the hyper-sectarian environment that Syria is. And especially like if internal issues still continue, and if the country still is seeing improvements, like the country is seeing improvements. Again, I mentioned the electricity thing. I still see the Syrian government remaining popular. Whilst at the same time, the ones who are probably going to be the biggest losers out of all of that, the direction of the Syrian government, and again, God knows best, we'll see, will be, of course, apart from the Iranians and Hezbollah and so on and so forth, who are obviously major losers of the Syrian war, will also be, quite frankly, a lot of the Palestinians. And how will they be losers, if not direct losers? Again, just disappointment about what could have been, and probably just isn't going to happen, which is any form of Syrian support for the Palestinian cause in any substantial way. It's just not going to happen. And particularly on this point, I've said this a few times to a few Syrian government people. I often find people just dodge this point when I bring it up to them. It's kind of like, okay, what are you going to do about Palestine? Are you going to actually help the Palestinians? Like 10, 15 years, what are you going to do? Do you want to do anything? I very often find that people just dodge the point. People don't like to deal with this point, on the nose. I suspect one reason is because they know deep down that they're actually not going to do anything. They just don't want to say it. But yeah, I don't know. It could be maybe my analysis is flawed. I don't know. I would really like somebody to say something about it.
I guess, what I would say about that is, to a certain extent, how is it even possible to be operating as a morally oriented state under the conditions of modernity, And one of the prime conditions or processes of modernity is that we live in a world that is ruled by rationalization, which means that decisions and policymaking and the world as a whole is understood through the lens of rationality, specifically a material rationality, a rationality based on calculus, calculus being the language of economics and science, and just materialism. And so if that material rationality is the paradigm under which states operate and policymakers make their decisions, then what would you do other than maximize your own survival, maximize your economic development, and maximize your acquisition of power? Unfortunately, those are the conditions of the world which the Syrian state and any other state is forced to operate, and the only alternative is becoming a pariah state like Iran or North Korea. So I guess to a certain extent, wasn't this inevitable? Wasn't it inevitable that once once you assume the mantle of statehood, that you were forced to operate according to your material situation?
Yeah, sure. If you don't want to be some sort of pariah state against the American world order. Yeah, I agree with that. You can choose that option, by the
Yeah,
way. You can choose to be a pariah. The
exactly,
Houthis have chosen to be a pariah state. Like this,
exactly.
you can make that choice.
Hmm.
They've made that choice, right? They've made that choice. They don't care about development. They don't care about
Exactly.
how much electricity they get. They don't care. Them and their supporters and a significant portion of the Yemeni population has basically made the choice. We will be pariahs. They shout in the
Hmm.
streets, "We want World War III," so that they can try to
Hmm.
help the Palestinians. So
Exactly.
this is the choice
Yeah.
that they've made. And I'd be a liar if I didn't say, of course, there's something
Mm-hmm.
morally commendable in that, right? Regardless of the Houthis and
Mm-hmm.
getting into their wider actions in Yemen, um, there's something morally commendable in that. At the same time, I also know I'm not in a position to really criticize the Syrians because
Mm-hmm.
I live in London, you know what I mean? I live in the middle of it. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
complain to Syrians. Oh, why don't you? What am I gonna tell them? I'm gonna tell them go confront the Israelis. Um, in the end, that's their choice to make. I, as a very far away observer, I can say, look, I can understand these people's actions. I can understand these people's actions. I can understand Syrian actions. I can understand Yemeni actions. I can understand Syrian actions here. I can understand, some other parties' actions here or there. Um, I can give my opinion on it, but in the end, whatever, it's just my opinion. But I also know that, like, me ultimately criticizing anybody too much, the Syrian government or people who support the Syrian government. I'm not a guy who lived through 10 years of a civil war, a dictatorial regime, and
Mm-hmm.
I have no gas, and my home is cold, and
Yeah,
I don't know where
of
my
course.
family is. I'm not that guy, right? So, uh, I gotta take
Yeah.
a very detached kind of point of view on this and be like, hey, look,
Yeah.
it is what it is. I completely understand the situation. At the same time,
Mm-hmm.
as a half Palestinian, and then just as a guy who cares about these sorts of things, I can also say, hey, look, I see the trajectory this is going in. I would appreciate if, because you have the power to do
Mm-hmm.
so. I don't got the power to do
Mm-hmm.
anything. Again, I live in London, right? I can't do anything about it. Not really. You have a little bit of power to help out this oppressed group of people that are on your border. Uh, what are you gonna
Yeah.
do about that, boys? And if you ain't gonna do anything, hey, just say it almost. You know what I mean? Just say it so that we can stop a charade or whatever. Just say, sorry, boys, we ain't gonna do anything because then my glass towers are gonna get blown up. Do you know what I mean? No offense. Sorry,
No, of
I'm not
course,
trying to
yeah,
be
no,
offensive
and
here,
the
but
just
it
the
is what it
thing I
is.
would say is, and absolutely
Yeah.
that, we have to, I guess, refrain from being overly judgmental towards towards the Syrian people and Syrian state.
Oh
When
yeah, 100%. I'm
when we
not
have
trying
it
to
so
be. I'm
easy
really not trying
living,
to be.
uh, wherever we live, you just gave yourself away. This guy lives in London. No, I'm just kidding. I do too, but
Sorry, guys.
no, but no, exactly that. It's easy, and so that's again, I share that perspective of trying to refrain from being overly judgmental when we are not in their situation. And again, I guess I would just reiterate that to a certain extent, until the modern condition and the modern reality undergoes fundamental change, we're not really going to see macro level macro level moral decisions being made. And that's the same way reason why the genocide in Gaza is able to happen for the simple reason that the power in the world, that is America, allows it to happen. And until that power has either dissolved or changed its nature, then it will continue to allow things like that to happen. And similarly, until the power that forces the Syrian state and every other state to operate according to material rules continues and sustains itself, as long as that material paradigm sustains itself, then we will continue to see not only the Syrian state but every state act according to its best interests in terms of survival, the acquisition of resources, and economic development. And I guess that's what really is going to be the thing that
Yeah,
uh, changes the possibility of what's acceptable when it comes to moral political action in the Middle East and anywhere else, is the reintroduction of of moral paradigms, and perhaps even the re-enchantment of the world, you might say.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly,
I
man.
think as
Yeah,
well, because I think it's easy to kind of get trapped into the thinking of, oh well, if they can just recover, if they can just get a little bit of development, then they can maybe even strengthen the military, strengthen their defense systems. It doesn't happen. Like, there's countless examples. Like, for me, one of the biggest examples is Pakistan. Pakistan has a huge military. It's a nuclear power. What have they done for Palestine? Nothing. Are they even still able to prevent Indian aggression? No, not really. We have very recent examples of that. response was nil. So and the U.S. Army, or sorry, the Pakistan Army is very much beholden to the will of the U.S., as we've seen examples of as well, to the point where they'll help oust the current prime minister if that's what foreign interests dictate and want. So
Yeah.
certainly, yes, I really agree with both of you guys that certainly for me as well, I still have a level of
Yeah.
goodwill for Ahmed Al-Sharaa, the Syrian government. I certainly have all the sympathy in the world for the Syrians and what they've endured. I think most people, unfortunately, still aren't aware of the horrors, particularly those that were tortured under Assad and just have to live um, in that regime. But definitely, it's just only natural that our expectations are high as well. We have, or even if they're maybe not that high, but we have
Mhm.
some expectations, I suppose, of some Palestinian support, which I think it's fair to say
Yeah.
hasn't been met yet.
Mhm.
Inshallah, that changes, but it's not looking like it will, at least in the near future, unfortunately. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a difficult situation, and if I was in Ahmed Al-Sharaa's position, I would probably equally struggle and agonize over what to actually do. And if his decision is I can only do what's best for the Syrian people, then at least some good will come
Mhm.
to the Syrian people. But it's obviously always going to be a disappointment for Palestine.
It's 100%. It's what I fear is that Syria basically takes the same deal, and unfortunately, it seems like they're quite eager to take this deal that all the other Arab regimes in the region have taken.
Yeah.
That deal being, you forget about the Palestinians, and we'll give you some money. We'll secure your regime. You'll be in the good books of the world empire. Arguably the strongest empire mankind's ever seen, the United States, and you can develop. And we'll secure your elite, and you can be okay. And the elite of your country can travel. The elite of the country can, develop their own personal wealth. Your country will develop massively. You don't have to worry about sanctions. You'll get investment. But that group of people over
Mhm.
there, you got to forget about them. And I fear that Syria will put itself down a path that they
Right.
basically do that. Even if they don't do it as explicitly, I don't think they ever will
Yeah.
do it as explicitly as the UAE. I don't think they will sign like a
But
normalization
some
agreement. I really
version
don't.
of
Uh,
choosing material
yeah,
prosperity
Yeah.
as
some version of
as
that.
much as you can do so.
Yeah,
And again, so let me ask you a question.
yeah.
To in terms of what I was saying about, to a certain degree, this is just the inevitable decision making of any state. Um, how what what do you think is actually realistic? Going forward, like, could they actually do much more under modern conditions, or are we really going to need to see a a quite radical altering of the world order before we start seeing more moral actions and moral paradigms um, in political decision making?
I definitely think there needs to be a more radical change. The Middle East has people who would be willing to, basically rage against the
Hmm.
machine, to revolt against the world order, for the sake of what they think is right. You see it in Gaza. But I think for the majority of
Hmm.
people, no, they don't want that. The
Hmm.
majority of people want to live their life, and they want nice things, and they want a nice life. And the fact of the matter is that confronting the United States and or confronting Israel, it actually, like, from a purely materialistic
Yeah,
perspective, it doesn't make a lot of
there you go.
sense to do so. Um, it really only makes sense from some sort of moral perspective. Like, from the point of view of, for instance, if we take a look at the internal debate now in Lebanon over the debate over Hezbollah's weapons, the majority of the arguments of the people who are against Hezbollah retaining their weapons basically boils down to, I just want to live my life, man. Like, just forget about Palestine, forget about, I don't know, whatever, our beef with the Israelis. I just want to live my life. Um, and that's because these people don't have any
Mhm,
sort of moral attachment to the Palestinian cause. They don't have any sort of moral attachment to, like, the sense
mhm,
of ummah. Half of them are Christian, and they're not even like Arab nationalist Christian. They're just like, I just want to live my life. I want to go to Jounieh, which is a popular,
mhm,
kind of seaside city in Lebanon. I want to go to the beach. I want to live my
mhm,
life. What are you talking to me about Palestine for? Yeah, I'd support Palestine. I'll do the
mhm,
Instagram posts, but please don't actually make me do anything about it. Um, and I think that's how a
mhm,
lot of people actually are. Um, again, in Lebanon, you have a huge portion of the population that basically says this, right? So I
mhm,
just want to live my life. And so they really want Hezbollah disarmed because Hezbollah, quite frankly, gets in the way of them just living their life. They're not able just to live their life because Hezbollah's weapons basically decide a huge percentage of the fate of the country, right? Um, and likewise, with the decision makers in the Middle East, a
mhm,
lot of them just want to live their lives, right? They don't want to be killed by the Israelis and live in a bunker and all this stuff. They
Yeah,
don't want to do that. They want the penthouse. What are you
and they're
talking
a
to me
mhm,
target
about
as
these things?
well.
But
We've seen,
yeah,
like anyone is a target.
yeah,
You're
yeah. All the like this, you die. You
mhm,
die in droves.
yeah.
The Israelis kill you like that. Just death and death and death and death. They don't want to do that. Um, And a lot of people as well, again, like, they'll talk about Palestine, woohoo. They don't want to enter into a war with the Israelis. They don't want to oppose the United States of America. It's going to sanction your country and make life very difficult
mhm,
for you. They don't want to do these things. Um, and I think that's part of a wider conversation. Is that a moral failure of the people of the Muslim world? Is that a moral failure of a lot of these people? Um, does it show that, yeah, ultimately materialism wins out? Does it show that ultimately um, the thing that wins out is just
mhm,
self-preservation, and actually the Palestinians do end up as the biggest losers of the modern Middle East? And I unfortunately am of the opinion that it's a very realistic possibility is that the Palestinians just lose. And I think that's unfortunate. Like, I really hope, obviously, that doesn't happen, but I really think it's a very big possibility that enough people don't consider is that, quite frankly, the Palestinians just lose. Um, and a biggest reason for the Palestinians losing is that the Arab world is filled with losers. It's not that the Palestinians are losers; it's that the Arab world is filled with losers, um, and they just don't want to do anything about it. Really, do you know what I mean?
Oh, I
Yeah.
was gonna suggest we wrap up, but I was hoping that we'd end on a slightly more positive note. So, well, inshallah khair, bro.
Don't worry, guys.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Inshallah, khair, boys. We
It's gonna
got
be
it,
okay,
boys. It's
boys.
gonna be okay,
We're
boys.
gonna get there.
Oh.
Ahmed Al-Sharaa he has to wait for his truce agreement to end. Just two more turns, and he'll be able to do surprise war. Little Civ
No,
reference thrown in.
it
It's
is what
it's
it
it's
is.
it's it's a
Like,
sombering point to end on, but I think that is the reality of the
I
situation.
guess
yeah,
Inshallah,
I
we,
guess
yeah,
we
the
hope for the
the
best, but
positive spin on
yeah,
it is that we are witnessing a radical altering and realignment of the world right now in terms of the
yeah,
international institutions and even the economic
yeah,
structures. A lot of Western economies are focusing on reindustrialization and tariffs, and that's actually undermining the international trade and economic order that was actually set up by America and the West. They're actually undermining it themselves with their orientation towards tariffs and unilateral economic decision making. And that's just one area. But again, in terms of the rise of China and the resilience of Russia under sanctions and the war in Europe, and I guess a lot of these elements overall do show that the American led world order, which has been so horrible for most of the world, especially the Muslim world, the entire Muslim world, but really a lot of other people besides Muslims as well. That world order is declining, and uh, hopefully that will open up opportunities for people all across the global south to have to make more sovereign decisions and make better live more authentic better lives outside of a world order that destroys their culture and economics and independence. And so I guess the silver lining of all of this. And like you said, actually, even how you described Israel and their actions in the Middle East right now, that it's totally rabid. That's the sort of rabid decision making you make when you're so threatened and backed into a corner. That's when you get rabid, and so I guess destructive towards yourself, because a lot of their policies are self-destructive. And so I guess that's the silver lining here, is that we are witnessing an unraveling, and I guess we can count on that, as a minimal viable product to bring us towards something
Yeah,
different. And because we're so confident that the current world order is awful, then I guess I personally take a bit of you know optimistic that what comes after has to be a little bit better, at least.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh no, 100%. I agree that it'd be very difficult for me to imagine a world order that is worse, especially for the Muslim world,
Mm-hmm.
than the current American world order. Um, and by the way, when I say that, I think the Palestinians will win, but I'm just saying that it's like people don't comprehend or consider the possibility of them losing enough, which I
Okay,
also
but you
think
do
like
think they're
it
gonna
could
win,
happen.
so
You
it's
know what I
okay.
mean?
We're back. Okay, we're back.
Yeah, there you go. We got it, boy.
I think it's a good
Okay,
way to
excellent.
wrap it up.
Yeah,
No,
that's good.
it's off the to you both. That was a really enlightening discussion. I think hopefully people listening and watching found it interesting and beneficial. I think definitely all, but for a lot of us, our attention is certainly on Syria and how they develop, how things go. And yeah, look, we certainly are. Duas and everything, and hopes are for the Syrian people that things work out, and of course for the Ummah as a whole, and for stability in the region, and of course the decline of the Israeli war machine and their influence in the region as well. So yeah, well, thank you for watching, for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks, Sam.